Imagine a group of superheroes, but instead of capes, they wear lab coats. These people are called psychologists. They have helped us understand why we feel happy, scared, or curious like real-life mind detectives. So here are all the best psychologists and what they say. Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud was a thinker who tried to help us understand why life and relationship can be confusing and painful. He believed that we are all driven by the pleasure principle, which makes us seek easy rewards and avoid unpleasant things. He thought that as babies, we are guided by this principle, but if we follow it too much, it can lead to risky behaviors. Freud is known for founding psychoanalysis, a new way of thinking about psychology. Freud's most famous book, The Interpretation of Dreams, was a big success. But despite his achievements, Freud often felt unhappy. He thought a lot about his own problems and fears. For example, he was convinced he would die between 61 and 62. Although he actually died much later at the age of 83. Freud described a conflict between three parts of our minds: the id, driven by the pleasure principle, the superego, driven by societal rules, and the ego, which tries to balance the other two. He urged us to look back at our childhoods to understand the origins of our neuroses. Freud believed that our early experiences with our parents shape our ideas about love and relationship. While some people might think that Freud's ideas are too hard to understand, others find them really relatable when they feel emotions or do things they can't explain. Carl Jung. Carl Jung was a Swiss psychologist born in 1875. He studied unconventional topics like alchemy, the paranormal, and dance movement therapy. He believed in the reality of ghosts and explored his own subconscious during a psychotic breakdown. Jung's childhood was marked by unusual behaviors such as inventing a secret language and questioning his identity in games. He later studied psychiatry under Eugene Blur and even came into contact with Sigmund Freud, although they eventually parted ways due to different theories. He thought that inside our minds there are different parts of our personality that we are not always aware of. He also believed that all people share a kind of common mind, where we all have similar thoughts and feelings. Jung thought that by understanding and accepting these hidden parts of ourselves, we can become the best version of ourselves. His model of the psyche includes the ego, persona, shadow, and self. The ego is the center of the consciousness, the persona is the mask we wear in social situations, the shadow represents our unconscious aspects, and the self is the goal of integrating all aspects of the psyche. Jung's ideas are critiqued, but they offer a unique perspective on the human nature and the psyche, emphasizing the journey towards self-realization. His work continues to influence psychology and philosophy. Alfred Adler. Despite being one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, Adler is often overshadowed by Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud. What sets Adler apart is his practical approach to understanding human behavior. He believed in using common sense to explain why people behave as they do and how they can change their behavior to live happier lives. One of Adler's main ideas is that the source of our suffering often lies not in our life's challenges, but in the solutions we adopt to deal with them. He believed that humans have tendency to strive for self-created goals. These goals are shaped by a higher order goal called our self-ideal, which represents the type of person we aspire to become. Adler identified two primary ways people deal with feelings of inferiority: coping behaviors and safeguarding behaviors. Coping behaviors involve directly addressing the cause of the feeling, while safeguarding behaviors involve avoiding or denying the issue, such as making excuses. B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner was an American psychologist known for his work in behaviorism. He believed that human behavior could be understood through the principles of operant conditioning, which involves learning through reinforcement and punishment. Operant conditioning changes behavior by adding consequences. For example, if a dog does something bad, we can reinforce it to make it happen more, or punish the dog to make it stop. So there are 4 ways this can happen. We can draw the 4 options in a table. If reinforcement is positive, we add something pleasant like a cookie to increase the likelihood of a behavior. If reinforcement is negative, we still want to increase that desired behavior, this time by removing something unpleasant like the leash. If punishment is positive, we add an unpleasant response to decrease behavior. But when punishment is negative, we also want to decrease behavior now by removing something pleasant like the carpet. If the behavior disappears, this is called extinction. Skinner believed that animals and people naturally do things until they learn from a stimulus that changes their behavior. He tested this with a mouse in a box with a lever that gave food when pressed. This was later known as the Skinner box, showing the ABCs of the behavior. A stands for antecedent. The rat accidentally hits the lever that triggers the release of food. B stands for behavior and refers to the response. The rat keeps pressing the lever. And C stands for consequence. Food keeps coming out. Jean Piaget. Jean Piaget was a Swiss psychologist known for his work in child development. He proposed a theory of cognitive development that suggests that children go through 4 stages of mental development. The first is sensory motor stage, from birth to age 2, where we learn through our senses and movements. The next one is pre-operational stage, from ages 2 to 7, where we use symbols and have lots of fantasies. Then comes the concrete operation stage from ages 7 to 11, where we start to use logic and can understand concepts like conversation. And finally, the formal operational stage from ages 12 onwards, where we can think more abstractly and understand complex concepts. Piaget believed these stages are crucial for full human intelligence. He was fascinated by animals from a young age and became a pioneer in studying how children's thinking develops. Ivan Pavlov. Pavlov was a famous Russian psychologist who discovered the concept of classical conditioning. He is best known for his experiment with dogs. He noticed that dogs began to salivate at the sight of a technician who fed them. So Pavlov set up an experiment where he played a sound like a metronome while giving the dogs food. And after a few repetitions, the sound alone made the dog salivate. He called the food an unconditioned stimulus because it naturally triggers salivation, and the sound is a neutral stimulus, which became a conditioned stimulus after being paired with the food. And the dog's response to the sound alone was a conditioned response. Carl Rogers. Rogers was a prominent American psychologist and one of the founders of humanistic psychology. His approach to therapy is known as client-centered therapy. He says that when we are a baby, we have a whole true self. But when we grow up, we split ourselves into 2 parts, the real self and the ideal self. The real self is who we truly are, including our thoughts, feelings, behaviors, but the ideal self is the person we aspire to be, influenced by societal expectations or cultural norms and personal ambitions. Erik Erikson. And finally, Erik Erikson was a German-American psychologist who expanded Sigmund Freud's theory. He says that personality develops in a series of stages, each characterized by a specific psychological crisis that must be successfully resolved for a healthy development to occur. Stage 1 is basic trust versus mistrust, where infants learn whether they can trust the world and feel safe. Stage 2 is autonomy versus shame and doubt, where children explore their bodies and develop self-confidence if allowed, or feel shame and doubt if restricted. Stage 3 is initiative and guilt, where children take initiative and explore new things, and if they get criticized, they feel guilty. Stage 4 is industry versus inferiority, where children start comparing themselves to others. Stage 5 is identity versus role confusion, where they experience an identity crisis. Stage 6 is intimacy versus isolation, Stage 7 is generativity versus stagnation. And finally, stage 8 is ego integrity versus despair. The psychologists we discussed have collectively shaped the landscape of modern psychology. If you like for a part 2, or if you like these kind of videos, smash the like and subscribe for more videos like this, and send it to your friends. Thanks for watching.